The slap came out of nowhere. 1 second, I was trying to explain that I hadn't broken the vase, and the next, Mom's hand connected with my cheek so hard my ears rang. I stood there frozen, my face burning, my heart racing. Before I could say a word, my brother burst into laughter, clapping his hands as if it were some kind of performance. Dad leaned back in his chair, smirking like it was the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, something inside me broke, not just my pride, but the last tiny piece of hope that maybe, one day, they'd love me like family. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd cried too many times before. I stared at the floor, silent, while Mom yelled about how I was always careless, how I never learn. My brother added his usual cruel jokes, calling me names, mimicking me in a high-pitched voice. Dad just sipped his tea, nodding in approval as if this was the family bonding he enjoyed after dinner. They didn't see me as a person anymore, I was just a punching bag for their frustrations. When Mom walked away, muttering that I should clean up the mess, I knelt on the floor, picking up the shards of glass. My fingers bled as I gathered the pieces. I wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair it was, but I knew what would happen if I did, another slap, maybe worse. So I stayed quiet, my silence was my only shield. That night, I went to my room and locked the door. I sat on the bed, staring at the marks on my hands, the redness still on my cheek. It wasn't just about the slap anymore, it was everything. The years of humiliation, the loneliness, the way they made me feel small for simply existing. I thought about how my friends talked about their families, family dinners, laughter, birthday surprises, and wondered what that even felt like. I had never known warmth like that. My home was cold, even when the lights were on. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at 3 names. My best friend, my aunt, and my teacher. 3 people who had once told me, call me if you ever need help. I'd never wanted to burden them before, but tonight felt different. Something in me whispered that if I didn't reach out now, I might not make it through another night like this. The first call was to my best friend, Sam. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice sleepy but warm. The moment I heard him say my name, I broke. I couldn't hold it anymore. The tears came rushing like a storm, and I told him everything, every slap, every insult, every night I wished I wasn't born. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, there was silence, and then he said, "You're not going back there. Not like this. I'm coming over." The second call was to my aunt, the only relative who had ever shown me kindness. She lived 2 towns away, and when I told her what had happened, she gasped in horror. I could hear her moving around, grabbing her keys, saying she was on her way. I tried to tell her not to, that it was late, but she said, "Family doesn't hit. Family helps. I'm coming." For the first time in years, someone called me family without hate in their voice. The last call was to my teacher, Mr. Reynolds. He had always looked at me differently, not with pity, but with understanding. When I told him what was going on, he didn't hesitate. "You did the right thing calling me," he said firmly. "Don't worry, we'll take care of this. You're not alone anymore." By the time the clock hit midnight, headlights appeared outside my window. My aunt's car. She stepped out in her slippers, her face pale with worry. Sam was right behind her, his hoodie pulled over his head. They both came inside quietly, whispering my name. My heart raced as we gathered my backpack and a few clothes. My aunt looked around the house, shaking her head in disbelief. "They'll answer for this," she whispered. When we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. The lights in the living room were still on. I could see Dad's shadow moving near the window, probably wondering where I was. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time, I wasn't scared. I felt the cool night air on my face, and it felt like freedom. We reached my aunt's home an hour later. She made me tea and let me shower. I sat by the window afterward, wrapped in a blanket, and felt something I hadn't in years, peace. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, whether my parents would call or try to find me, but it didn't matter. I was done being their victim. The next morning, my teacher arrived with a social worker. They asked me questions, and I told them everything, every bruise, every cruel word. As they took notes, I felt lighter, like I was shedding years of pain. My aunt held my hand through it all. When it was over, she said softly, "You did the hardest thing, you chose yourself." The night after I left home felt quiet in a way I'd never experienced before. There were no shouts from the living room, no footsteps outside my door, no sarcastic laughter from my brother echoing through the walls. Just silence, and the sound of my own heartbeat reminding me that I had escaped. But peace wasn't immediate. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see my mother's furious face, my brother clapping, and my father smirking like it was a show. Their cruelty played in my head like an endless film, and for a moment, I wondered if I would ever really be free. When morning came, I sat at my aunt's kitchen table, staring at the mug of tea she'd placed in front of me. Her house was filled with sunlight and smelled like cinnamon, such a contrast to the gray emptiness I had grown up in. She smiled softly at me and said, "You don't have to go back. We'll make sure of that." Her voice was firm, almost protective, like she had already decided I was hers to protect. I wanted to believe her, but years of disappointment had taught me not to trust words too easily. As the day went on, things began to move quickly. My teacher, Mr. Reynolds, arrived with a woman from Child Protection Services. They asked gentle questions, took notes, and recorded statements. Every time I hesitated, my aunt squeezed my hand and whispered, "It's okay. You can tell them." So I did. I told them everything, the slaps, the shouting, the humiliation, the way my father's silence always spoke louder than any words. It felt strange, putting my pain into sentences, as if I were finally translating a language I'd been forced to live in. Later that afternoon, they left with promises that they'd handle everything legally. My aunt sat beside me and said, "You've started something big. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it." I nodded, unsure if I was ready for what big meant. Part of me still wanted to hide under a blanket and pretend nothing had happened. But the other part, the one that had made those 3 calls, was done pretending. The next few days passed in a blur. There were police visits, interviews, paperwork, and constant phone calls. My parents called too, of course. The first time, my aunt answered. Mom's voice was sharp, accusing her of kidnapping me. I could hear her shouting through the receiver, saying I was making up stories. My aunt calmly replied, "He's safe. You'll talk to the authorities, not him." Then she hung up. I watched her hands tremble slightly afterward, but she smiled at me anyway, saying, "They don't get to hurt you anymore." That night, I finally turned my phone on. There were dozens of messages, some angry, some manipulative, some fake apologies. My brother had texted a laughing emoji, and said, "You really ran away. Drama much." My father wrote, "Come home. Let's talk like adults." But they weren't adults when they were laughing while I bled. I blocked them all. It felt strange pressing that block button, almost like cutting off a piece of my own history, but the relief that followed was something I can't explain. A few days later, a hearing was scheduled. My aunt and I sat outside the courtroom while my hands shook uncontrollably. Mr. Reynolds came too, his presence calm and steady. "You're doing something brave," he told me. "Most people never find the strength to stand up to those who hurt them." I nodded, but I didn't feel brave. I just felt tired. When my parents walked into the courtroom, they looked the same as always, cold and composed. Mom avoided my eyes. Dad whispered something to his lawyer, and my brother leaned back in his seat, smirking just like he had that night. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and told the truth. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Every slap, every insult, every cruel laugh, they all came out in words I never thought I'd have the courage to say. My mother's eyes widened, my brother shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, my father's smirk faded. The silence in the room after I finished was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The court ruled that I would stay with my aunt temporarily, with ongoing investigation into the abuse. My parents were ordered to attend counseling and parenting sessions. It wasn't total justice, but it was enough for now. As we walked out, my aunt hugged me tightly and said, "You did it." I didn't respond, but I felt something shift inside me, a small spark of pride that I'd fought back after years of silence. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. I enrolled in a new school, started therapy, and began to laugh again, real laughter, not the kind I used to fake at home. Sam visited often, bringing snacks and video games, acting like everything was normal. And maybe that was what I needed most, normal moments after years of chaos. One evening, I found myself sitting by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was my dad. He'd written, "We didn't know how much we hurt you. We're sorry." I stared at the message for a long time. Maybe he meant it, maybe he didn't. But I realized it didn't matter. I wasn't waiting for their apologies anymore. Their regret couldn't undo the years I spent feeling unloved. What mattered was that I'd taken my life back. I put the phone down and stepped outside. The air smelled like rain, and for the first time, I wasn't scared of storms. I had survived the worst one already. I thought about that night, the slap, the laughter, the smirk, and realized that it had been the start of my freedom. 3 calls had changed everything. They had ended my silence, my pain, and the belief that I didn't deserve love.